Welcome back to the Shoebill Studio. I'm Steve, and today we're going to be reviewing Warlords of the Middle Kingdom, which is a Kickstarter-exclusive small box expansion for Zombicide White Death. And this is an absolutely stacked box. It's got 8 survivors, 1 necromancer, and an abomination. And similarly to the Warlords of the Rising Sun expansion, this X-Pack is quite tightly themed. But instead of Japan's Sengoku period, here we're in China's Three Kingdoms era. Each character included in this expansion is drawn straight from that turbulent history, which was later immortalized in the 14th century Chinese epic, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. That means you get a roster of beloved leaders, brilliant strategists, and infamous villains, an all-star cast of the Han Dynasty's collapse and the power struggle that ensued thereafter. The result is a box that feels bigger than just a survivor pack. It's actually a slice of history on your table. And while this expansion definitely has its rough edges, the Warlords of the Middle Kingdom will have you fiending for more time with your White Death core set, and may even inspire, as it seems to be the designer's intention, some very cool homebrewed campaigns that highlight the era's standout moments. Let's start with some context for this expansion. This little box more or less spans 2 overlapping campaigns of history, viewed through the lens of the famous novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The first campaign is the fall of the Han Dynasty, and features this expansion's new necromancer Zhang Jiao and the new abomination Dong Zhuo. In 184 CE, Zhang Jiao led the Yellow Turban Rebellion, plunging the Eastern Han Empire into chaos. His uprising weakened the Han court, and into that power vacuum stepped Dong Zhuo, who seized the emperor and ruled through corruption and fear. Together, they represent the spark and the tyranny that cracked the dynasty apart. The second campaign is the rise of the Three Kingdoms. From the chaos left in Dong Zhuo's wake, 3 rival kingdoms emerged: Shu, Wei, and Wu. The survivors in this box represent their most famous leaders. First up, the Kingdom of Shu, led by Liu Bei, supported by his oath brothers Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, and guided by the legendary strategist Zhuge Liang, known as the Sleeping Dragon. This was the Brotherhood Kingdom, built on loyalty and Han legitimacy. Second up, the Kingdom of Wei, led by Cao Cao, the dominant northern warlord, and Liu Bei's most ruthless rival. Wei's strategist Sima Yi became Zhuge Liang's great nemesis, and for decades they waged a war of wits. And finally, we have the Kingdom of Wu, founded by Sun Jian, the Tiger of Jiangdong, with Zhou Yu as his strategist. Wu often stood alongside the Kingdom of Shu against the northern power of Cao Cao, most famously at the Battle of Red Cliffs in 208 CE, where the Shu-Wu alliance shattered Cao Cao's massive naval fleet and saved the south from conquest. But Zhou Yu's rivalry with Zhuge Liang made that alliance tense and short-lived, and within a decade, the 2 kingdoms were fighting over territory along the Yangtze. And in the end, none of these 3 kingdoms truly triumphed. Shu was conquered first, Wu held out the longest, but it was Sima Yi's descendants who outmaneuvered them all, seizing control of the Kingdom of Wei and founding the Jin dynasty, which finally reunified China in 280 CE. It's a reminder that even in history, the Sleeping Dragon and the Tiger of Jiandong couldn't outlast the patient strategist who played the long game best. Everything considered, the cast here isn't just a bunch of survivors. These are characters bound together by legendary oaths, uneasy alliances, and bitter rivalries. Some sworn to fight side by side, others destined to clash again and again. When you field this expansion, you're not just dropping minis onto the map, you're really throwing sworn brothers, rivals, and uneasy allies into the same desperate fight for survival, a tension that mirrors the real history behind them. So let's talk about what works well in this expansion, and for me, the highlight here is definitely the new necromancer Zhang Jiao. Whenever he's on the board, walker-class zombies you kill don't actually die. In fact, they just respawn immediately in his zone. That concentrates the horde into a growing choke point, and until you deal with him, you can't really thin the board very effectively. So paired with walkers like the Terror Kata walkers, he can flood the map with absolutely nutso speed. It finally feels like a necromancer who's really actually like raising the dead, and to me, it's just brilliant design. I love it. It gets you thinking about how to approach this growing threat. How do you eliminate Zhang Jiao once he's fully padded, his walker retinue out? And skills like marksman are really useful here. But if you can't get in there and line up that sniper shot on this dude, you gotta prepare yourself for a full press melee commitment. And the longer you wait, the crazier it's gonna get. This is definitely one of my favorite Necromancers in a long time. It really forces you into utilizing underutilized mobility skills like hit and run or slippery to push into back lines, forget about clearing zones entirely, save those AP to get to this Necromancer ASAP before he's rolling 30 deep and, forcing Abomination activations on repeat every single zombie phase. Just a lovely addition to the game. Next up is the new Abomination, Dong Zhuo, who's quite disruptive, especially early on. While he's on the board, survivors can't perform the search action, so if he spawns early, the whole flow of the game starts to shift. Suddenly, you're forced into sort of kiting him across the map to a cauldron as your only means of removal, and if you're playing one of the earlier versions of Fantasy Zombicide, you really are just only able to kite him. So your options are really left to pushing objectives, gaining XP through battle and picking things up, and pushing into leaning on leveling your skills instead of rummaging through the equipment deck as a means to improve your ability to do damage. Later in the game, he tends to lose a little bit of bite once you're fully geared because, you don't necessarily need to search at that point. But in the early turns, he's absolutely devastating, and the tension he creates is fantastic. It's like a full mental shift when you can't search early on. The amount of kiting and focus on mobility that this guy forces you to consider is definitely a welcome and enjoyable change of pace. And when combined with another Abomination, like the creepy equipment stealing baby Toil from the Frozen Fortress expansion, Dong Zhuo all of a sudden has legs to stay in the game almost indefinitely. The next thing that this expansion does a great job with is the survivors themselves. And the survivors here might be the best designed small box lineup in White Death so far. They're certainly my favorite. And you've got bruisers like Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, but you've also got mobile melee from like Jian and Zhou Yu, tactical flexibility from Cao Cao, movement and spell casting from Sima Yi and Zhuge Liang, and then of course like classic leadership skills from Liu Bei. And their starting skills, their blue level skills, are all strong, fun, and thematic, giving you something really cool to do basically from turn one without trivializing the game. Additionally, these survivors don't feel outlandishly overpowered to me. The absence of Born Leader alone is kind of refreshing, and I don't feel like there are any single survivors, maybe with the exception of Liu Bei, that can be good at whatever they want. This X-Pack feels a lot more balanced in a way that neither Virtues of Bushido or Warlords of the Rising Sun kind of managed. It's been quite a treat. One tangible thing I love is that the character skill cards have built-in guard actions, just like the previous two Survivor X-Packs we've covered, so there's no extra table clutter and you can drop them straight into White Death's core set without special prep or the use of guard action skill cards. Also, like the previous two Survivor expansions, this expansion is also dripping with theme. And so if you're a fan of Romance of the Three Kingdoms or any of the Dynasty Warriors games, or maybe you're just a Muso aficionado, you are gonna gobble this up, bringing all the gusto and zeal of your favorite hack and slash RPGs to bear here in Wintergrad. I know I've said something similar before, but maybe there's somebody out there building a mission set around the Battle of Red Cliffs or a Zombicide Romance of the Three Kingdoms mega campaign with these survivors all taking the lead. Sort of just exciting considering the possibilities. If you can't tell, I'm a big fan of this expansion. It's probably my favorite of the Survivor expansions so far that were released with White Death. But nothing's perfect, and before we move on to what doesn't work so well with this expansion, let's run through the roster of survivors. First up, we've got Liu Bei, who's the first and eldest of the Peach Garden Oath brothers and distant relative of the Han royal family, remembered as the virtuous and benevolent founder of Shu. His leadership and support skills echo that role, a commander who boosts allies and brings stability to the team. At blue level, he's got Brother in Arms +1 free combat action, which allows him to grant himself and whoever he's standing in a space with a free combat action as long as they are sharing that area. And then for his guard skill, he's got +1 free guard action. So both of these lean heavily into that sort of leadership theme that is very, very prevalent with Liu Bei, as he was the leader of his faction. At orange, we've got the option between +1 free melee action and shove. There's a little bit of tactician here with shove, being able to manipulate the board state and get guys out of a space or move them into a space that you can then burn down with maybe a cauldron or torch and some dragon bile. But definitely a little bit of flexibility here. It's not just only about damage if you need some more utility out of Liu Bei. And then in red, you've got the choice between +1 free combat action, Brother in Arms +1 to dice roll combat, or roll a 6 and add 1 damage to combat. So all of his red skills really lean into more damage in combat, and it's unique that all of them are sort of combat related because it means that he's extremely flexible. He can do anything with that combat action as far as ranged, melee, or magic damage. And, you know, having a second Brother in Arms skill is also very typical for the leader character in these expansions. So, you know, if you can get a lot of people into his space and, you know, you spec into those Brother in Arms skills, it's a very, very powerful way to do a lot of damage. All right, next up we've got Guan Yu, who is the second of the Peach Garden Oath brothers, later deified as the god of war. Known for his martial prowess and loyalty, his kit leans into heavy melee damage and extra dice, the kind of character who definitely dominates close combat. And at blue level, you get +1 die for melee actions, and his guard skill is damage to melee. So a little bit of AoE functionality with that extra die, and being able to kill brutes with guards right at the beginning in melee range, quite nice. At orange, he has the choice between +1 free melee action and escalation melee. And escalation melee states that you gain 1 extra die to roll for consecutive melee actions, and the bonus is cumulative and then lost whenever another type of action is performed. So obviously just leaning further into that melee damage, really those are your options here, is you can have a free action or you can get into escalation and deal lots in 1 turn. At red, you've got the choice between +1 free combat action, +1 to dice roll melee, or damage to melee. Further confirmation that this character really is just that melee brawler. It's really just about getting that melee attack into a position where you're just clearing spaces by the end game. Next is Zhang Fei, the third of the Peach Garden Oath brothers, infamous for his temper and ferocity. His abilities push him into tank territory, shoving enemies aside, springing across the map, and holding the line with raw aggression. And right at blue, you've got shove, and then your guard skill is push. So very clearly one of these tanky characters that has a bit of tactical advantage as far as their ability to move and clump zombies up into a single space. At orange, he's got the choice between +1 free melee action, which I think we're seeing a theme here amongst the Oath brothers, and then the other one is damage to melee. So Zhang Fei can really get in there and do a lot of damage pretty quickly if you spec him into, you know, increasing his damage to 2, becoming sort of a brute killer, but also somebody who can push zombies into a space and do a lot of damage all at once. At red, you've got the option between +1 free melee action, roll 6 +1 die melee, and sprint. And sprint is, I think, in my opinion, the most interesting choice here, because if you're looking for a survivor who can shape like the board state, especially in endgame, and just sort of brutalize zombies and get them over here and then push them over here, you know, this is your guy. Being able to have that much increased mobility, but also the ability to push and shove. And, you know, if you're using that in tandem with the actual guard skill that you have, all of a sudden you've got a ton of flexibility in both your own movement, but also the movement you can inflict upon the zombies themselves. Maybe for a different survivor to come in and swoop up all of those kills, you know, on their turn. So a very cool character that's got a lot of interesting combinations of skills, Zhang Fei. Next up is Zhuge Liang, the Sleeping Dragon Shu's master strategist. Historically renowned for clever schemes and near-mythic foresight, here he's built into a spellcaster and support character, bending the rules of the game in subtle but powerful ways. And Zhuge Liang is quite interesting, starting at blue with Spellbook and the guard skill push. And Spellbook allows you to basically just like cast spells from your backpack, also enchantments. You don't have to have them equipped in hand to be able to access them in combat or just on your turn, which is great, especially if you have got a lot of spells. You know, if you've been searching and you know you don't want to be dedicated to necessarily a high-hitting but costly or low accuracy spell. You know, you want to have AoE and all of the other enchantments that you've got on your person all accessible to you at once. Well, Spellbook is the way to do that. So very flexible skill that's fantastic. At orange, they have the choice between Lucky and Spellcaster. Spellcaster gives you a free magic action on your turn, but Lucky, in my opinion, is really the star of the show here. And this is what I mean by, you know, bending the rules of the game in subtle but powerful ways. The skill Lucky gives you the ability to reroll actions on your turn, and this is just a fantastic skill. And at red, he's got the choice between +1 free enchantment action, +1 free magic action, or +1 free melee action. The trifecta of these 3 red skills is a little bit bizarre to me, and I don't necessarily understand where they're going here. For me, you know, all of the flavor and punch kind of lives in the orange skills for Zhuge Liang. I think 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna be selecting +1 free magic action, and I can't think of many circumstances where I would be selecting that +1 free melee action. So an odd sort of choice there at red. Next up is Cao Cao, and this is the ruthless northern warlord who built Wei into the strongest kingdom. He's admired as a poet and administrator, but feared as a schemer, and his skills reflect that cunning. They really offer up extra turns, taunting of enemies, and unpredictable bursts of action. At blue level, he's got the absolutely fantastic skill of Zombie Link, and his guard skill is Evade. So Zombie Link essentially allows you to take an extra turn every time the extra activation card is drawn from the zombie deck, and you get to do your turn, your free turn, before the zombies move. So this can come in clutch at all times. But in particular, when you're at blue danger level, it essentially just gives you a free turn because the zombie activation cards don't actually do anything at blue. And so Cao Cao is sort of like moving in the shadows, getting free turns, and really turning on the heat right from the jump with Zombie Link. At orange, you get the choice between +1 free melee action and taunt. And for me, taunt is usually the choice here. I just love to force the zombies to move on the board, and it's so often a way for you to sort of counteract overextension of other characters that might be playing. You know, if you've got that friend that's always pushing back line and ending their turn in a space where there's a ton of zombies, you know, taunt and shove are fantastic abilities to make sure people like that are safe and not dead come zombie phase. At red, you've got the choice between +1 die combat, +1 free melee action, and hit and run. With the addition of Zhang Jiao, the new Necromancer, for me, hit and run is just such a fantastic skill to have on Cao Cao now. And it really makes it so that in endgame, you're not having to spend so many actions on clearing spaces. You really can just get in there and get out and take out whatever specific mob that you're having trouble with, and leave a space and be able to manipulate the board state, but also move through the board state without constantly having to overcommit to clearing zombies that are just going to come back during the next zombie phase. So there's a lot of options that you can go here. You can just make him a stronger fighter sort of generally, but hit and run is definitely the favorite for me. Next, we have Sima Yi, who originally was a minister in the Kingdom of Wei, and then later the strategist who outlasted Zhuge Liang, and then paved the way for his descendants to found the Jian dynasty. His design leans on movement tricks and spell casting, making him slippery and versatile. And Sima Yi might be the all-star, in my opinion, of this group. More really just sort of my favorite character, and it's because this is the first time I've played Zombicide and slippery became something that I relied on almost every single map, which allows them to move into and out of spaces with zombies without paying the extra activation costs to leave those spaces. It's invaluable. And their guard skill is +1 max range, which is another standout skill that is just I have not seen it necessarily in many other places. A very, very versatile character who is incredible right from the jump at going and getting objectives. You don't even have to gear this guy necessarily, as long as you can always leave a space and end a turn far enough away from danger. At orange, they've got the choice between +1 die magic and 1 free move action. And if you really want to lean into the catch me if you can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man, get that extra move action and always be too far away for the zombies' extra activations to get to you. At red, you get things that make you better at fighting. There's the choice between +1 free combat action, spellbook, and spellcaster. And so, you can become a pretty advanced magic user with Sima Yi, but in my opinion, the real value here is all in these the blue and the orange levels between a free move action and being slippery. I'm consistently using this character as somebody who is pushing objectives and avoiding combat because slippery at blue. Next is Sun Jian, the Tiger of Jiandong, the general who rose against Dong Zhuo and founded the Wu dynasty. On the board, he's fast and relentless with bloodlust mechanics that let him surge forward in melee. Starting at blue with bloodlust melee and +1 free guard action. Again, we've got a leader here of his group with that +1 free guard action. At orange, we get the choice between +1 die melee and hit and run. And this is such a fun combo to have somebody that's got hit and run at orange and bloodlust melee at blue. It really just gives you the option to be both mobile and just batter the hell out of the zombies. You can go in with bloodlust, get a ton of action economy, do some damage, and then leave that space for free at the end of your turn, or if you're trying to go off in a different direction. So it's kind of like a bizarre version of Slippery in and of itself. It's a little less efficient, but also gets some more kills in there so that you're getting XP, but you're also thinning the board a little bit. At red, you've got the choice between +1 die melee, +1 free melee action, and damage 2 melee. So just making all of those melee actions that you're doing better or giving you more of them. Sun Jian is definitely a favorite character of mine. I love these sort of bloodlusty, zergy characters in Zombicide. They do tend to get out in front pretty quickly, but some of the fun is in pushing the danger level up and out. And then finally, we've got Zhou Yu, who's Wu's brilliant strategist and the rival to Zhuge Liang. His skill set balances crowd control and melee flexibility, reflecting both his battlefield cunning and his ability to change the tempo of a fight. At blue level, he's got freeze melee, and then his guard skill is +1 move per zone. And so this is another just weird guard skill that is allowing guards to move twice as much as they normally would. But I think that the one that is really interesting is freeze melee, which allows him to actually push into zones and CC zombies that would otherwise hit him and probably kill him, basically at any state in the game. Freeze is a zone-wide sort of effect, so you could see how this would be a direct counter to the new Necromancer Zhang Jiao that would allow Zhou Yu to get into a space with stuff that would normally destroy him, and hopefully he'd be able to CC until the next turn unless you had a problematic activation. So very powerful to have straight from blue. I think Yasuka from the core set also has this as a blue skill. At orange, there's the choice between +1 free move action and damage 2 melee. Being able to increase mobility or get up into that 2 damage range really, kind of puts us into a bit of a hybrid situation here, where Zhou Yu can really do a lot of stuff, but you could make him the sanctioned brute killer, or he could be running objectives or picking up vault weapons or whatever with this extra movement. At red, there's the choice between +1 free combat action, +1 to dice roll melee, or hit and run. So again, we're leaning into more of a hybrid role where you could focus on combat, but you can also focus on mobility. Zhou Yu's a great character, and in my opinion, really kind of shines when they're pushing into melee range and relying on that freeze action to make sure that they're not dying out there in the zombie hordes. All right, so now that we have a better understanding of each survivor, let's talk about what this expansion doesn't do so well. And honestly, there are only a couple of really weak points. First off, the A-bomb Dong Zhuo is front-loaded. He's terrifying if he spawns early on, but once your team is equipped fully, he's not really much more than a standard abomination. So pairing him with other A-bombs or gear-destroying enemies keeps him relevant, but on his own, he really fades in the late game. The second thing that could be considered problematic regarding this expansion is the theme can sort of feel a little bit odd if you care about the specifics of the history. And this was also a problem that is shared with the Warlords of the Rising Sun. Cao Cao and Liu Bei were sworn enemies, and so seeing them fight side by side can sort of break immersion if you're historically minded. And the new Necromancer and Abomination do help sort of in unifying everybody against a common threat, but it's still a bit of a stretch if you know the backstory. So who is this expansion for? I think that this is for players who want sort of like a large and versatile survivor roster with a ton of variety. You've got tanks, you've got DPS, you've got melee and ranged and magic DPS. You've got folks that are seemingly completely focused on just utility or movement, and not in a boring way. It's not like on the nose. If I could be critical of Jian here for a moment, where it's like, your search is, you get 2 instead of 1. Like, Sima Yi is just about mobility, but in such a fun and nice way that doesn't feel bad. There's just a ton of flexibility and versatility in this group of survivors that isn't really available in another group that has released with White Death. Definitely a huge, huge bonus. And that's even before I mention where I think the biggest value is here. And that's in the new Necromancer in particular, and this new A-bomb. you get 8 characters, and you get a new A-bomb and a new Necro. Like, it's just so much value packed into one little box. And the new Necro in particular gets you having to play and counter them in ways that require all of the different flexibility and variety that's available in this box. So huge props regarding you know, the wide gamut of different things and options that's available here. Obviously, if you're a fan of Romance of the Three Kingdoms or Chinese history, I think you'll appreciate, you know, the historical relevance of these figures that will be out on the table. And then, of course, if you're a fan of Musou-style games like Dynasty Warriors, I think you're gonna love seeing some of your favorite characters with, you know, maybe you'll be spouting off Dynasty Warriors quotes as you mow down zombies, who knows. But you know, I can't overstate how anybody that loves new Necromancer and Abomination skills, they're really gonna love this set. So who is this not for? Honestly, I don't think this is not for anyone. If you love double negatives, you'll love that sentence. But honestly, I think that this expansion is where a lot of the value lives, as far as if you're looking for a new Survivor expansion that is tightly themed and, you know, is one of these sort of break-off Kickstarter exclusive Survivor expansions, this is the one to spend your birthday money on. It is really good. So my final verdict, if you can't tell, I really like this one. You know, Warlords of the Middle Kingdom is probably the best small box Survivor expansion for White Death. And the survivors are strong, but they're not broken. And the Necromancer is one of the best in the game, in my opinion. And the new A-bomb forces fresh tactical decisions, even if he loses a little impact, you know, later in the game. And so combining this with the cohesion of the theme, it feels less like just a standalone Survivor pack and almost sort of like a mini season of content. It's really interesting how different this one feels to me from the previous 2 Survivor expansions. So if you're invested in White Death, or if you have any love for the Three Kingdoms, I think that this is a very easy recommendation. It's really quite enjoyable so far. So that's it for my review of Warlords of the Middle Kingdom. If you played these Survivors or with this Necro and the new A-bomb, let me know in the comments who's your favorite. You know, are you totally jazzed when you see a giant clump of walkers around, you know, Zhang Jiao? Are you bummed out when you see the new A-bomb hit the table on turn 1, or are you excited to have to kite them to a cauldron? I think it really makes the cauldrons make more sense. I think people would want to see, you know, a little bit more variety amongst Necromancers and A-bombs in future Asmodee versions of Zombicide, but who knows, maybe people wouldn't want to see that. But if you do want to see more White Death content, you know, from the coverage of the Eternal Empire campaign expansion to all of the small box exclusives, make sure to check out my other reviews on the channel here. And if this review was helpful at all to you, be sure to like and subscribe. It definitely helps me out a ton. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.